In a courtroom filled with tension, Julia Grant sat on the edge of her seat, accused of a crime she didn't commit. With evidence stacked against her, it seemed like there was no hope for her defense. But just when everything appeared lost, a stranger burst in, claiming to be her long-lost sister, and revealing a shocking connection that could turn the entire trial on its head. What secrets lie hidden in the past? And could they be the key to Julia's freedom? Welcome to Limelight Tales. What if the truth you're seeking has been hidden in plain sight all along? Now, let's uncover the secrets together. The courtroom buzzed with tension as Julia Grant sat quietly at the defendant's table, her hands clasped tightly on her lap. She had always been a meticulous, rule-abiding accountant, the kind of person who double-checked every calculation twice. And yet, here she was, accused of orchestrating a multi-million-dollar embezzlement scheme that had rocked one of the city's largest investment firms. The prosecutor strode confidently across the room, presenting emails and financial records to the jury. "This," he said, holding up a printed report, "is proof that the defendant, Julia Grant, manipulated the company's accounts to funnel money into offshore accounts. She knew exactly what she was doing." Julia's defense attorney, Peter, did his best to counter the damning evidence. "Ladies and gentlemen, my client has maintained her innocence from the beginning. She has no history of criminal behavior, no motive, and no trace of personal gain from this alleged embezzlement. We believe someone else accessed her accounts and framed her." But the jury remained stone-faced. The evidence was too overwhelming. The fraudulent transactions were traced back to Julia's work computer. The emails authorizing them were sent from her official account, and even her digital signature appeared on the transfer documents. Julia sat frozen, her mind racing. She knew she hadn't done it, but proving it seemed impossible. The courtroom's heavy silence was interrupted by the sound of the main door creaking open. Heads turned as a woman in her late 30s rushed in, her face pale and her eyes wild with desperation. She wore a simple coat, slightly damp from the rain outside, and clutched a worn leather bag. "Stop!" the woman shouted, her voice trembling. "She didn't do it! That's my sister!" Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The judge banged his gavel, calling for order, but the woman pressed on, stepping forward until the bailiff blocked her path. Julia stared at her, confusion etched on her face. I don't know you," she stammered. The judge leaned forward, his expression stern. "Who are you, and what is the meaning of this interruption?" The woman took a deep breath, her hands shaking. "My name is Clara. I'm her sister." Peter turned to Julia, whispering urgently, "Do you know this woman?" Julia shook her head, her voice barely audible. "I don't." Clara's voice cracked as she continued. "We were separated as children. I was adopted after our parents died in a car accident. Julia was too young to remember me." She glanced at Julia, her eyes glistening with tears. "But I've been looking for her for years." The judge frowned, clearly skeptical. "Miss Clara, if that is your name, do you have any proof of this claim?" Clara nodded quickly, reaching into her bag. She pulled out a small locket and held it up. "This belonged to our mother. We each had one. Inside are photos of her and our father. Julia, you must still have yours." Julia's breath hitched. Slowly, she reached beneath her blouse and pulled out a delicate chain. A locket dangled from it, identical to Clara's. She opened it, revealing the same photos. The courtroom fell silent, the weight of the moment settling over everyone. Peter stood, his voice steady. "Your Honor, this is clearly an important development. I request a brief recess to speak with this woman. and determine the validity of her claims. The judge hesitated, but ultimately agreed. 15 minutes. Make it quick. In a private room, Clara sat across from Julia and Peter, clutching her locket as if it were a lifeline. "I know this is a lot to take in," she began, "but I'm here because I think the charges against you are connected to something much bigger. Something that started with our parents' deaths." Julia blinked, struggling to process the information. "What do you mean?" "Our parents died in an accident. That's what I was told." Clara shook her head. "It wasn't an accident. Before they died, our mother wrote letters. She was afraid. She said someone was threatening them, someone connected to Dad's business. After the accident, I was taken in by another family, and I lost track of you. But I never stopped searching." She pulled out a stack of old letters, their edges yellowed with age. "These are from our mother. She mentioned a man who was pressuring Dad, someone powerful. And recently, I found out he's connected to the company you worked for. The same company accusing you of fraud." Peter leaned forward, his lawyer's instincts kicking in. "Do you have any evidence to back this up?" Clara nodded. "I've been digging into this man's dealings. I found records that suggest someone hacked Julia's accounts to set her up. The IP address used for the transfers doesn't match her home or office. It matches a different location entirely. And there's more." She pulled out a folder. "This contains transactions tied to an offshore account. The account isn't in Julia's name. It's in her boss's." Julia's heart raced as the pieces began to fall into place. "You're saying my boss framed me, and he might be the same person who hurt our parents?" Clara nodded solemnly. "I believe so. He's been covering his tracks for years, and you were just the latest person in his way." Peter stood, his mind already formulating a plan. "We need to get this evidence admitted. If this checks out, it could change everything." Julia turned to Clara, her voice breaking. "I still don't remember you, but thank you. Thank you for coming." Clara reached across the table, squeezing Julia's hand. "I couldn't let them take you down for something you didn't do. We've already lost too much." As the recess ended, Julia and Clara returned to the courtroom, prepared to face whatever came next. The judge looked down at them, his expression unreadable. "Miss Grant, are you ready to proceed?" Julia glanced at Clara, a new resolve in her eyes. "Yes, Your Honor, we are." The courtroom settled into a tense silence as Julia took her seat beside her lawyer, with Clara sitting just behind her. Peter stood confidently, addressing the judge. "Your Honor, new evidence has come to light that may not only exonerate my client, but also identify the real perpetrator of the crime. With your permission, I would like to introduce testimony and documentation provided by this witness, Clara, which directly implicates another individual in this case." The judge regarded Peter with a skeptical gaze, but ultimately nodded. "Proceed, but this better be worth the court's time." Clara was called to the stand, her hands trembling slightly as she was sworn in. She began by recounting her discovery of the letters written by their mother, detailing the threats made against their family. "Our father was a business partner with a man named Richard Collins," Clara explained, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. "My mother wrote that Richard was involved in illegal activities, and when my father threatened to expose him, he began receiving threats. Shortly after that, my parents died in what was described as a car accident. I never believed it was an accident." The courtroom murmured, and the judge rapped his gavel. "Order," Clara continued, now pointing toward the prosecution table. "Richard Collins is the CEO of the company where Julia worked. He's the one accusing her of embezzlement, but he's also the one who hacked her accounts and funneled the money into an offshore account under his name. The prosecutor immediately objected. "Your Honor, this is speculation at best. The defense cannot make baseless accusations without proof." Peter held up the folder Clara had provided. "Your Honor, this folder contains the evidence. Digital records linking the fraudulent transactions to an IP address tied to Mr. Collins. Additionally, the offshore account receiving the funds is registered under his alias, which we can prove with documentation provided by the witness." Courtroom. The judge accepted the folder and reviewed the documents carefully. His expression darkened as he flipped through the pages. "This evidence is compelling. I will allow it to be entered into the record." Clara then described her investigation, revealing how she had traced the offshore accounts and uncovered the digital breadcrumbs that led back to Richard. "I also have emails," she said, pulling out printed copies, "between Richard Collins and a known hacker he hired to breach Julia's accounts. He set her up to take the fall so he could hide his involvement in the company's financial discrepancies." The courtroom erupted in whispers again. Richard Collins, who had been sitting smugly at the prosecution table, visibly paled. The prosecutor tried to regain control. "Even if this evidence points to Mr. Collins, it doesn't absolve the defendant entirely. She had access to those accounts and could still be complicit." Peter didn't miss a beat. "That's where the timeline falls apart, Your Honor. The fraudulent transfers occurred during times when my client was either logged out of the system or physically not present at work. The timestamps prove she couldn't have initiated the transactions herself." Julia, emboldened by the turn of events, finally spoke up. "Your Honor, I've spent my entire career working honestly and diligently. I trusted my boss, Richard Collins, and had no idea he was using me as a scapegoat. This evidence proves my innocence." The judge called for a short recess to allow both sides to review the new evidence. As Julia and Peter regrouped, Clara leaned over, her voice low but firm. "I've waited years for justice for our parents. We're close now, Julia. Don't let him intimidate you." When the court reconvened, the judge's expression was grave. "After reviewing the evidence and testimony, it is clear that there is substantial cause to investigate Mr. Collins further. The court orders his immediate detainment for questioning." Gasps filled the room as officers approached Richard Collins, who rose to his feet, his arrogance replaced by panic. "This is a mistake," he protested, but the evidence was damning. As he was escorted out, Clara and Julia exchanged a look, the first glimmer of relief appearing in Julia's eyes. The nightmare was far from over, but for the first time, she felt hope. The judge turned to Julia. "The charges against the defendant are hereby dismissed, pending further investigation. Miss Grant, you are free to go." Tears streamed down Julia's face as Clara rushed to her side, pulling her into a tight hug. For the first time in years, Julia didn't feel alone. The sisters had found each other again, and together they would face whatever came next. As Julia and Clara stepped out of the courthouse into the crisp afternoon air, the weight of the ordeal began to lift. The truth had come to light, and with it, a chance to rebuild what was once lost. Sometimes, even in the darkest moments, the bonds of family and the pursuit of justice can uncover a strength that had been buried all along, reminding us that no lie, no matter how carefully constructed, can stay hidden forever. Thank you for watching and supporting. Share this story with someone who loves a good twist. Subscribe for more captivating tales, and always remember, truth has a way of revealing itself, no matter how deeply it's buried.